How long until an axe-throwing place pays for itself? Let us actually buy one and find out. You take an old restaurant space, screw some wooden targets to the wall, buy a rack of hatchets, and open the doors. People pay by the hour to throw an axe at a bullseye. A hatchet costs a few dollars. A plank of wood costs a few dollars. After you buy those once, almost every throw is close to pure profit. And this is a real, growing sport now. With a World Axe Throwing League, pro throwers, and a national championship, the whole industry is worth over $200 million a year. Sounds like the easiest money ever invented. It is not. And the reason is standing right next to every single thrower. You cannot let a room full of strangers sling sharpened steel without a trained coach watching each lane. And that coach is a wage you can never switch off. Add the beer license, the insurance, and the lease, and the math turns fast. By the end of this video, you will know what an axe-throwing bar really costs, where the money actually hides, and why the cheapest thing in the whole building, the axe itself, is the last place you will find the profit. The buy-in. Start with what you are actually buying, because it is not what the sign says. The axes are almost free. A throwing hatchet costs a few dollars, and the targets are just planks of softwood you replace as they get chewed up. If that were the whole cost, anyone with a hardware store credit card could open one. And that is exactly the problem, which we will come back to. Real money goes into the room. You need a space with high ceilings and depth for the throwing lanes, safety cages of chain link fencing around each lane, a floor that can take a dropped axe, and, in most places, a bar. Building all of that out to code runs anywhere from about $235,000 to over $777,000 for an independent venue with 5 to 10 lanes. Here is the single most important number in the whole build. If you take a raw empty space, you pay full price for fire systems, ventilation, plumbing, a kitchen, a bar, and accessible restrooms. But if you take over a space that used to be a restaurant, one that already has all of that, you can skip more than $100,000 of that work. Which means the lease you sign matters more to your bottom line than the axes ever will. So the tiers look like this. The cheap version, a bare warehouse with chain link and boards, thrown together for very little. The real version, a proper venue and a second-hand restaurant with a bar and a good location. And the trap version, the one that looks like the cheap version but is quietly failing, which is a story for later. Whatever you build, remember the shape, cheap to run, expensive to open, and you usually need a large cash cushion on top, often most of $1 million, to survive the slow first year. What you inherit. You inherit a sport that is nearly free to run, wrapped in obligations that are not. Start with the good part. Once the room is built, your cost per customer is tiny. A thrower uses a little wood and a little wear on an axe, and that is nearly all of it. On the throwing itself, your margin is close to 99%. That is a number most businesses in this series would kill for. Now the obligations that come with it. First, safety labor. You cannot leave people alone with axes, so every group needs a trained coach or marshal to teach them, watch them, and keep the lane safe. That is staff you are legally and practically forced to keep on the floor, no matter how quiet the night. Second, the waiver and the insurance. Every single customer signs a liability waiver before they throw, exactly like a trampoline park, because you are handing the public blades. Ensuring a business whose entire activity is throwing axes is not cheap. Third, the bar. In most locations, the real draw is throwing axes with a beer in your hand, which means a liquor license, all the rules that come with serving alcohol, and the extra liability of mixing drinks and sharp objects. And fourth, you inherit a trend. Axe throwing is fun and new and shareable, but new can wear off. You are signing a long lease on the bet that people still want to do this in 5 years. An axe. Where you inherit a trend. An axe throwing bar has several income streams, and the throwing is only the doorway. Layer 1. Walk-in sessions. A person or a small group pays by the hour for a lane and a coach. This is the base. The Friday night crowd and the curious first-timers. Layer 2. And this is the big one. Private events and corporate bookings. Birthday parties. Bachelor and bachelorette nights. And above all, company team building. A booked corporate event pays far more than a handful of walk-ins, often several $100s for the group, and it fills the dead daytime and weekday hours with a guaranteed crowd. Layer 3. The bar. Food and drink, especially beer and wine, sold to people who are already there for an hour or two. Drinks carry a fat margin, and a group at an event will spend more on food and drink than they did to get in the door. Layer 4. Leagues. This is the quiet secret of the whole business. A weekly axe-throwing league turns a random visitor into a regular who comes back every week for a season, pays to play, and brings friends. Leagues were a genuine lifeline for these venues because they are steady, repeat money that does not depend on the weather or the walk-in crowd. Stack it together and the picture is clear. Throwing gets people in the door, but the parties, the beer, and the leagues are what actually pay the rent. Listen to that again. Here is the part worth stopping on. Axe throwing itself, the thing on the sign, the thing people come for, is almost pure profit and almost none of your real cost. A throw costs you a sliver of wood and a little wear on a cheap hatchet. So if the throwing is nearly free, why is this a hard business? Because the money and the danger both live somewhere else. Real money lives in the beer and the corporate parties and the weekly leagues. Real cost lives in the coach you must pay for every lane, the insurance on a room full of blades, and the lease on a building you spent a fortune fitting out. Listen to that again. You are not really running an axe-throwing business. You are running a bar and an events venue, and the axe is the gimmick that gets a group through the door and gives them a reason to buy a round. The hatchet is the bait. The beer and the booking are the catch. That is why two axe-throwing places on the same street can have completely different fates. One treats the axe as the product and slowly starves. The other treats it as the hook for a bar and an event space, and thrives. The ledger. Turn the page to what leaves the account, and notice how little of it is axes. Rent is usually the biggest line. A good location with the right ceiling height and footprint is expensive, and rent can run well over $100,000 a year before you have sold a single throw. Then payroll. Those coaches on every lane, plus bar staff and someone running the desk. Because you cannot cut the safety coaches without closing lanes, your labor does not shrink much on a slow night. Then insurance, which is heavy for obvious reasons, and the cost of the liquor license and alcohol compliance. Then the small stuff. Replacement wood and axes, which is a rounding error, plus marketing, card fees, and utilities. And notice the strange shape of this ledger. The activity you sell is nearly free to provide. The costs that can sink you, the rent, the coaches, the insurance, have almost nothing to do with axes at all. You are carrying the cost structure of a bar, while a lot of first-time owners think they are running a cheap game room. The trap. Here is the trap, and it catches people before they even open. Axe throwing looks like the simplest business on earth. Screw some boards to a wall, buy a bucket of hatchets from the hardware store, and you are open. Anyone with a credit card can do it. And because it looks that easy, everyone tries. Towns that had 0 axe bars suddenly had 3, all fighting for the same Friday night crowd. That is the first half of the trap. Low barrier to entry means your competition can appear overnight, right down the street, and there is nothing special stopping them. Now the second half, and it is worse. All the stuff that actually costs money, the build-out, the coaches, the insurance, the lease, is invisible when you are dreaming about cheap axes and easy fun. So people open on a shoestring, in a bad space, with no bar and no events, and then discover that the rent and the payroll arrive every month, whether the room is full or empty. Put the two halves together. You are betting a heavy fixed cost, a lease and a payroll you cannot cut, on a trend you do not control, in a market anyone can enter. When the novelty is fresh and the room is packed, it feels like a license to print money. When the trend cools or a rival opens next door, the lease does not care. To understand why this whole business even exists, you have to go back to a rained-out cottage trip. In 2006, a Toronto bartender named Matt Wilson went to a cabin with friends. It would not stop raining, they were bored, and someone pulled out a hatchet and started throwing it at a tree. Wilson felt that strange, satisfying release of sinking an axe into soft wood, and he could not stop thinking about it. Back home in the city, he taped a target to a board in his backyard, bought a $10 hatchet, and invited some friends over. They each chipped in about $20 to cover the cost of wood, and every week they would gather to throw axes over a few beers. Wilson wrote up a point system, and a little competition began. 8 friends became 16. 16 became 32. Before long, he was running 2 full leagues a night in his backyard. with spectators stopping by to watch. Read what happened next, because it is the shape of the entire industry. In 2011, the crowd outgrew the backyard, and Wilson moved it indoors into a plain warehouse. He called it the Backyard Axe Throwing League, and it was the first business in the world to sell urban axe throwing to the public. From that one rainy afternoon grew a chain, a payroll of hundreds, and a brand new nightlife category that spread across North America. It all started with a $10 hatchet and a few friends drinking beer. The death spiral. So watch how the easy money version dies, because it follows the same script every time. An owner sees a packed axe bar and thinks, "That looks simple, I can do that cheaper." He signs a lease on a plain space, screws up some boards, buys the axes, and skips the hard parts. No liquor license, because that is paperwork. No event program, because that is work. No leagues, because he does not understand they are the point. He opens on the novelty wave, and the first few months look great. Then the wave passes. Those curious first-timers have all come once and moved on. Walk-in traffic thins out. Meanwhile, a better venue opens across town with a full bar, a slick corporate package, and weekly leagues, and it quietly takes the repeat customers, the ones who actually come back. Now the numbers turn. Rent and the coaches still have to be paid every month, but the only thing coming in is a trickle of walk-ins buying nearly free throws. Without the beer margin, without the events, without the league regulars, there is nothing to cover the fixed cost. The room that looked like easy money becomes a lease he cannot escape. The axes were never the problem. The empty calendar was. So who survives, and how? The axe bars still standing did a few specific things right. 1. They got the liquor license and built a real bar. They understood from the start that the beer, not the axe, is where the margin lives, and that people will happily pay bar prices to drink while they throw. 2. They chased events, not just walk-ins. Corporate team building, bachelor parties, birthdays. A calendar full of booked groups is high margin, predictable money that fills the quiet hours, and it is the single biggest difference between a full venue and an empty one. 3. They ran leagues. Weekly league nights turn strangers into regulars and give the venue a steady base of repeat revenue that does not depend on whether axe throwing is trending this month. 4. They were smart about the lease. Smart operators took over second-hand restaurant spaces to save a fortune on the build-out, in good locations, so their single biggest cost worked for them instead of against them. None of that is about the axe. It is a bar, an events business, and a members club that happen to hand you a hatchet on the way in. So does owning an axe-throwing bar work. Let us run it and treat this as a model, not a real venue. You take over an old restaurant with a bar already in place, so your build-out is far cheaper than starting raw. In a good year, the trend is hot. Your lanes are booked with corporate parties, your leagues are full every weeknight, and the bar is busy because throwing axes and drinking beer turns out to be a very good combination. Because the throwing itself costs you almost nothing, all that party and bar and league money drops through, and the place makes real money. That is the good year. Now the other side. The novelty cools. A competitor opens 2 miles away, walk-in traffic fades, and if you leaned on walk-ins instead of events and leagues, the room goes quiet. But the rent still lands every month, and every open lane still needs a paid coach standing beside it. Suddenly a business with almost no cost per customer is losing money, because its costs were never about customers. They were about the building and the trend. Here is the real verdict. An axe-throwing bar is 2 bets stacked together. One is a bet on a trend, that people still want to throw axes years from now. The other is a bet that you can run a bar and an events venue well, because that, not the throwing, is the actual business. Win both, and you have a cheap-to-run, high-margin room built on beer and parties. Lose the trend or run it like a game room instead of a bar, and the lease and the coaches will bleed you dry while the axes sit there, cheap and useless. So the honest answer is this. Axe throwing can be a very good business, but almost nothing about why it works has to do with axes. The axe is marketing. The money is beer, bookings, and leagues. Treat it that way. Sign a smart lease, and it can throw off real cash. Treat it as a cheap room full of hatchets, and you have bought yourself a very sharp way to lose money slowly. The thesis close. So look again at what you really bought. Not the sport, Not the satisfying thunk of steel biting into pine. Not the bullseye. Not the crowd cheering a stuck axe. That is the fun, and the fun is only the bait. You bought a bar with a liability problem and a long lease. You bought a room full of coaches you cannot send home, and a beer license you cannot run without. And you dressed all of it up as a game, using a $10 hatchet as the reason anyone walks in. An axe-throwing owner is not really selling axe-throwing. They are selling beer and corporate parties and a weekly league, on a fixed lease, riding a trend, using the oldest tool on earth as the hook. Get the bar right and the lease right, and the good nights are very good. Forget that it was ever a bar, and the cheapest thing in the building will quietly cost you everything.